even better. They've become passports to a world so cool the people there burn Guardian furniture supplements just to keep warm.
Naturally, you're going to want one. But there are going to be some problems with that, chief among which is the amount of money that cars like this cost these days.
This Series 1 E-Type, for instance, is not the most sought-after model. But even so, a good one will set you back £50,000. Then there's the DB5. This is much rarer than the E-Type. They only made 1,000, and as a result, a good one will cost around £120,000. And what do you get for this huge amount of money? Well, you get a car from a time when men were in black and white, and there was no such thing as fern cotton. What you get is a car that's 40 years old. A car that predates the invention of the front-loading washing machine. And it's the same story with the Jag.
The early models came with a flat floor, so there was no space whatsoever for a driver. And this actually didn't really matter because no driver in the world could actually manage the Moss gearbox, which was from the 1940s. Changing gear with it was a bit like stirring coal.
So, what about the handling? Well, that'd probably kill you, but luckily most E-Types overheated long before they ever actually got to a corner.
Whoa, God!
Still, you're thinking, at least they'll be fast.
Well, they're certainly not weighed down with airbags, inertial seat belts or anti-lock brakes or indeed any safety equipment whatsoever. And there's no catalytic converters either because their engines were designed not to save the planet, just to get round it as quickly as possible.
So, to find out how fast they are by today's standards, let's compare them to a brand new 2.4-litre Honda Accord.
How can this be? How can I be losing to a Honda?
It seems like a strange result. I mean, when Jaguar launched the E-Type, they said it would do 150 miles an hour. So how could it lose to a Japanese box? Well, let me explain. They were lying! It would barely do 140, and Aston Martin were just as guilty. They said the DB5 Vantage would produce 325 brake horsepower. But it wouldn't! You got 280, tops! In reality, this car would barely have been able to keep up with Goldfinger's Golden Rolls. So, the 60s styling can move you, but the 60s engineering can't. And speaking of which, I've just seen the temperature gauge, which is, hot.
This car, for instance, hugely mollycoddled, lives on a bed of peacock feathers, but even so, it's got a sticking rear brake, and all the water that you see here on the floor, a few moments ago it was all in there and it's come out. See the joys of classic car motoring.
So, these cars are ferociously expensive to buy, not very nice to drive, unsafe and slow. And on top of all that, they'll almost certainly break down every time there's a week in the month. might imagine then that the price of all this coolness is too high. But no. You see, these days there are companies that can modernise cars like this without changing the look. Think of the operation as automotive Botox. Nippy handling, thanks to nip-tuck engineering.
This E-Type, for instance, appears to be completely standard, but it isn't. If you get in close, you'll spot the big modern brakes, the modern tyres, and round the back, the modern suspension. So it should stop and handle like a modern car. And if we lift up the bonnet, behold the magnificence. And behold also the cooling system that can actually cool the engine, and the electrics that don't need to be hit with a hammer before they'll work. I have to say, this is the nicest E-Type I've ever driven. It's crisp, the gearbox is good, the brakes work, turn-in sharp, lots of grip, and when it runs out, lots of fun.
There are Aston Martin specialists that can do the same sort of thing with your DB5. They can enlarge the engine, for instance, so your car goes like Aston said it would. And that's just the start.
Inside you can have pretty much whatever you want. I mean, this grille, behind which 007 had his tracking device, you can have a sat-nav there, and you can even have air conditioning, so you can be as cool as you look. Trouble is, all this work isn't cheap. I mean, the E-Type we've been looking at today, that's currently on the market for £90,000, and you can spend a lot more than that. And if you want a worked over DB5, that'll be £200,000.
Who cares though? Because think what you're getting. 21st century engineering with 60s styling. That's a pretty unbeatable combination.